Let us proceed now. Please move on to the sheet number 3. And here, what we are going to do as a next step is we are going to take assumptions for the next couple of years. Now, somebody asked this question that why only 5 years? So, I would like to clarify here that you need not stop yourself to just 5 years. If you are interested to basically create a financial model for a longer duration, you can do that. But the point is, the moment you go ahead and try to create a financial model for more than 5 years or more than 7 years, then you wouldn't really have quality inputs and assumptions to be taken for the subsequent years because that's too far ahead and we don't know what's going to happen at that point in time. So taking an assumption is basically slightly difficult for a period longer than 4 5 years. That's why you would see that mostly the financial models are created for 5 years time. Now, what I am going to do, and now Zian here, your question would also be answered to a certain extent, and completely it will be answered in the next file. How we're going to use these days? Just by looking at the historical data, we have been able to see that the company is maintaining an inventory of roughly about 105 to 106 days. So going forward also, if I have to project something, looking at the historical trend, I can say that going forward also I'm going to have the similar kind of inventory days because I would still be maintaining a 3.5 months equivalent of inventory going ahead as well. So what you could do, you could make it, or you could either take an average and then keep it constant, or you could also keep it constant as the same value which is over there. So take an average and then keep it constant. This is how we can manage this. Does that make sense? Then I've kind of taken it equal to this, which is being dragged on the right hand side. All right. So the same stuff, the same logic, I can kind of copy and paste down for all the components. So what we could do, we could either take the last year 2018 number and keep it in terms of assumption. So what it means is that I'm assuming that my inventory is going to be 3.5 months going forward as well. So whatever would be the raw material cost that I'm going to compute, I would use this logic to work out the balance sheet. So this is how we can project the balance sheet of a particular organization. Now, what I'm going to do after this is I want to see that how this is going to be used for projecting the balance sheet item. So for that, what we essentially need to do, first of all, we need to demarcate the inputs and assumptions that we are going to take over here, right? Dipankar, no. The year-on-year increase is not applicable for the ratios. The ratios are pretty static. What will change is the raw material cost, is the sales number. That would change. And correspondingly, automatically, these values would also undergo a change. So we cannot just increase these days by a certain percentage or reduce it by a certain percentage. That is not logical. Rather than doing it on the ratios, we should do it on the base parameters. Like the base parameter over here is the sales and cost. So I'm going to apply that growth percentage on the base value. All right. Now, the prepaid expenses, as I said in the previous sheet as well, I'm going to assume that it will remain constant. So I'm not going to change it. I'll keep it constant. I'll have it constant all across the next 5 years. Right? Now comes the next part, which is more to do with the P&L, which is on the revenue computation, which has the sales and sales price and the sales volume. So what we need to do over here is we need to have a look at what the management of the company is saying. Because I cannot just by sitting in a room and I can decide that this company's sales price will increase by 10%. I can't do that. Just without any basis, I say that the volume will go up by 50%. I cannot do that. We need to have logical inputs for it. And those logical inputs would essentially come when we read the management discussion and analysis. For us is to basically read the management discussion and analysis document from the what you call as the annual report, if that is available. So if the company has filed the S1 document, S1 form, we need to see what's the kind of data which the management is providing about its sales price and accessories. And obviously, if I don't get any input, then There's no other option but to take a historical average. Or I could also look at how the industry is expected to perform, and then that's how I apply the inflation out here. So that's another basis for doing that. So let's go back to this case study and read what the management is saying. So here is the crux of the management discussion and analysis. Here we have that CMC is not planning to invest in the capex in the next 5 years. So it has no plans to invest in any kind of capital expenditure in the next 5 years because it believes that it is heavily invested in the property, plant, machinery, and equipment. So now there is no need to invest in that capex for the next 5 years. And then the important part is that the big competitor is entering into the same category, because of which the CMC will not be able to maintain their sales volume. So the sales volume we wouldn't be able to sustain. So it might go down slightly down in the next 2 to 3 years before starting going up slowly, and it will affect accessory segment heavily. You see the word heavily is mentioned. The management believes that our volume in the accessory segment is going to go down drastically. So let's come back and see how the volume can be managed. And on the price, it is saying that CMC is planned to follow the historical inflation for raising the prices and expect the same for their expenses as well. So their prices and the raw material costs, they are expecting to use the historical data for the purpose of projection. So let's come back here, see what the prices are. I'm going to take the average and use it flat all across like this. I'm going to put this formula here, which makes it equal going forward. And before that, I've taken an average, which is roughly about 4.9%. And when you copy and paste the formula here, you get to see that the accessory segment sales price increase was roughly about 12% in the last 2017. Then it increased by 25%. So if I take an average, it's roughly about 18.5%. So we can take that. Or if you want to tone down this a little bit, we can say that it's 18.5% this year, but obviously going forward, I cannot have 18.5%. I would gradually taper it down to about 8 to 10%, which is the normal trend seen in the industry. So all of this will come from your experience, your knowledge about the industry, the way this company has been working in the past, and the way this industry works at a wider level. These kind of inputs will help you take an assumption for you, right? So this is how we can assume certain data points for the sales prices of these two products. Does that make sense? Any questions? Yes, Abhijit. I'm assuming that the historical inflation will be consistently applied going forward as well. So I've kept it constant. We're assuming nominal cash flow. Regarding the seasonality, see, the thing is that here when we are creating the financial model, we are talking about how a particular year is going to look like, and we are creating a mathematical mechanism for bringing everything out here, right? So if you want to apply some other tools to be able to do a better forecasting in order to account for the seasonality and all that stuff, we can definitely do that. On that side. So the thing is that if there is any seasonality, in some months it will go up, in some other months it will go down. At an overall level, you get to notice the historical trend and follow. Like in the hotel industry, you get to see that in some time, in a couple of months when there are summer vacations or something, that's a peak period. The occupancy tends to go up drastically. And when there is, when there are a couple of months when the tourism typically doesn't happen, when people don't typically like to travel, the business is also typically slow on a slowdown mode. In those times, the occupancy is very low. So on an average, if you see, it will get averaged out and you would be able to see the broad sense as to how it is, what it was. So in peak period, it was, let's say, 80% occupancy. In off period, it was just about 40%. But on an average, across it was 55%. So that kind of analysis you can definitely do, and you can take that input out here while creating the annualized model. But what you may want to do in case you want to bring the monthly seasonality factor, then this model that we're creating right now on an annual basis, you could basically, instead of having 5 columns, you could have 60 columns, meaning 12 months for each of the year, and bring the monthly inputs out here. You can do that. But that will be too much of an ask if you were to do it on a monthly basis. So usually what companies tend to do, they prefer to have a annual model, and at max sometimes they may want to split the very first year into quarterly, right? That's the next best choice that the company can. Okay, let me read question. So Zian, when I say the accessory segment will be affected heavily, it is about the volume. If you see, the management is saying that we would use the historical inflation for the price, but the volume will be heavily affected. So in the volume, I'm going to, reduce that a little bit. And the inflation is nothing but basically the increase in the price to account for usual increase in prices. So that's why, Vishak, you asked this question that yes, it is inflation adjusted. The prices are adjusted because of inflation. And that's why we are using the nominal items. Then coming to your part, uh, so Abhijit, your point is that in the COVID time, should we do on a monthly basis? Definitely yes. If there is an abnormal situation which you would like to project, then you may want to capture it in pieces. So maybe you could have a side schedule and say that in the year, in the current year, I'm expecting the next 6 months the demand will be very less, so the price would also be impacted. But then after that, I will again restore the original volume back in my company. So that is more of a side working that you can do and bring the output from there as part of your financial model being created at an annual level. So any abnormal thing, any seasonal factor, anything which is going to be there on a temporary basis, you could do that computation and bring the value of that out here in your annual financial model, right? So, Richie, to your point that why is my average in accessories an increasing trend? So maybe if you could notice what I've done, here I've taken the average in the first year and I'm making it constant in the future years. So it is the constant figure in the future year. That's why it's safe, right? All right. No, you don't have to put the dollar sign. If you want, you can. If you want, you can put the dollar sign here and then drag the same formula. But I have written the average formula here and then I've maintained it equal to the previous year. So that's how this is how it is being managed, right? So that's how we have the revenue figures. Now let's talk about the volume. We have already discussed the price part of the revenue. Now let's talk about the volume. Volume is
Sorry, Amardeep. I have one point on the sales price. Okay, if we see into the raw material side, right, in the accessories, it's been reduced by 52%, and we are still if we are still maintaining the average price of 18.5.
no, I'm not going to just wait for a minute. I haven't covered the raw material component as of now, so I'll come here and then discuss it. So when there is no visible trend, we do something else. So just park this point for next 2 minutes. I'll come to the raw material and discuss it. Right? Okay. So let's move ahead. I'll come to the raw material part later. Let's first talk about the volume. Now, in the volume segment, if you read the management discussion, they are saying that because of the competition, it is quite possible that we would lose on the market share, which means that our volume will go down for the next 2 to 3 years. So, if I say that it's going to go down, there is no objective way to find out a number. I'm going to use a logic which is more based on my experience of this industry. So I would say that let's say it is going to be minus 20%, minus 10%, and then probably it will remain flat before going up, gradually going further. So what inputs I'm putting here, it's more like based on my experience of how I visualize this industry. Because I've seen that this industry, if the competition is coming and the management believes that it will impact my volume, probably my main bread and butter is coming from the sale of cameras, so that could go down by 20%. And then it says that accessory segment will be heavily impacted, which means that the lenses, the bags, or something else which are being sold, that will be impacted heavily. Now, what's the definition of that heavily? I don't know, but it's again more of an assumption. You might say heavily is like 40%, 50%. Somebody else would say 25% is also quite a drastic dip. But what we are doing right now, we are trying to have a mathematical model. So next time, when we bring this model or take this model to the client and we're trying to discuss it, the person would say that no, I think 50% is too much. I think it will go down by 40%. Next year, you're saying 25%, but I think it will go down by 30%. Then you are saying 0%, but I think it will again be minus 10%. So what that person might do, that person might give you some more inputs. And then you make changes over here, and automatically the model is going to be updated because there is an integration. So majority of the time in the real life is actually spent on discussing the validity of these assumptions, the rationality being followed to arrive at any of these inputs. And here what the management is saying that the volume of accessory is going to be impacted heavily and it might go up a little further in the last fourth or fifth. All right. So when this situation arises, do we also calculate the threshold or the break even? Yes. Over here, Dipankar, the point is that we need to understand what is the definition of this break even. Is it a break even from a product standpoint or break even from a company's standpoint? So that kind of level we can only work out once we have the entire P&L and P&L model created. So once we'll have the P&L completed in this file, then we'll be able to say like right now there's nothing in the P&L. But once that would be created, we would be able to come to a conclusion that whether a company is breaking even or not at an overall level. Because it may happen that some products are low margin products and some products are high margin. So it is quite likely that to be able to keep your business running, a few products will have very low margins with few huge volumes, while other products may have volumes, but also margins are also pretty. Right? So let us compute the sales prices and sales volume using these percentages. So if I believe that if I show you the last time when I showed you the year-on-year formula, I had mentioned that year-on-year increase is equal to the current year divided by previous year minus 1. But now what I'm going to do, I've got the percentages here, and I have to apply these percentages to be able to work out the numbers. So we discussed it in the Kia model that the current year number is going to be equal to the previous year number multiplied by 1 plus growth percentage. So we would use previous year number 440 into 1 plus 4.9% growth. That's going to be this. And the best part about this formula is that I can straight away copy it and appropriate places wherever I have to apply these percentages. So wherever the year-on-year growth rate or percentages are given, I can use this formula and pick it up. So basically my current year number is equal to the previous year number plus the growth. So essentially what we do, if it is 5% growth, we take 1.05 and multiply it with the previous year number using this. All right. So this is how the sales price and sales volume can be worked out. So take a minute, finish it off, and then we'll move on to the next component, which is your raw material cost. So I'll take a pause here for a minute to allow you to work on this before I move forward. In the meanwhile, if you've got any questions, please let me know over the chat. Okay, so the formula in the cell E17 is this. Sorry, in the cell H17 is this. So Abhijit, there is no formula for 400 in E70. This is the historical data that we have plotted here for 2016. All right. I hope all of you are done till this stage. I see no further questions. Uh, H24. H24 is this cell. So it's more of an assumption. So minus 20%, minus 10% that I'm taking here is basically an assumption that we have taken for these values. There is no formula in this cell. There is a formula in the cell above, which is basically the same formula that I've copied and pasted from the top. All right. Now comes the next part. So Dipankar, in the real world, what happens is it's a game of information availability. What we are discussing right now is that if you know what the input is, this is how you would model. But as I said, practically the majority of the time is spent on trying to understand what is the rationality behind a particular assumption. So you would know that this is how my business is going to be looking like, either by looking at the historical trend or by looking at how the industry is expected to behave in future, what kind of competition, what kind of work the competition is doing, so which is going to impact me in future and all that stuff. So maybe a combination of statistical models could also be used there to be able to work out some numbers. All of these work together help you take an informed decision on the assumption that you have to take. But as I said, it is more like an estimate. You are assuming that your sales would go down by 20%, your volume would go down by 20%, but in reality, it may go down by only 15%, or it may actually go down by 30%. We don't know because it is the best estimate that we can do as of today, and it could be driven by any factor. It could be driven by a statistical model, it could be driven by certain probabilities, it could be driven by how the future of this industry looks like and what proportion of that market I'll be able to capture. Right? So let's see what we do here for the raw material cost. Now, Pratnesh, you also have a point regarding here. So here, if you see, the trend is not pretty much visible for the raw material cost because the raw material cost increased drastically in the year 2017 and then it increased marginally by about 8% in the year 2018. If I take an average, then it is like a suicidal uh, assumption here because we are saying that on an average going forward it will increase by 21% or 20%. That's pretty huge. There could be one-off aberration in the raw material cost increases by about 33%, which we witnessed in 17, but it cannot be 20% or a double-digit growth in the cost every year. When you notice that our revenue assumption is around, just about 4.9% or 5% approximately for cameras, how can I take 20% cost increase year on year? It's going to be a loss-making business for us. So either I will try to push my raw material vendor to reduce the price and make it a little lower, or I will also be forced to basically increase my sales price, right? So I wouldn't take an average here because that would be an illogical stuff for me to do here if I simply apply the average. I'm straight away going to say that the company expects it to remain equal to the historical level. So I will make it 8.4% and keep it consistent because that seems to be a logical number. But again, it is an assumption. Somebody might argue that it would be 10%, somebody might argue that it should be 5%. But whatever it is, you put that here on the basis of certain logic and then see impact on the end result. Because the purpose of model is to be able to play with these inputs and see the impact on the final output. That's what the purpose is. Nobody is saying that this 8.4% is the sanctified number which will be there in the company for sure. That's not going to happen. Right? But the problem is with this excessive. It jumped by 96% in 2017 and declined by 52% in 18. So that's not a visible trend. If I take an average of these two, that again is 22%, but on the top of it, there is one number which is positive, another number which is negative. The taking a simple average is actually not going to make sense. But the point is, what we could do usually, if I see that the raw material cost of the cameras, though it is not visible here that the increase is consistent for camera accessories, in reality, it might happen that if the camera raw material cost is increasing by a certain rate, probably its accessories also would increase at pretty much the same rate. In the absence of any information, at least I can assume a better assumption. I can take a better assumption that the growth in accessory segment will be exactly equal to the camera segment. So whatever price increase I am expected to see in the camera's raw material, I think that's going to be the same for the raw material of accessories as well. Now it's my assumption, it's my take because I feel that these two things go in tandem. So whatever growth I've taken in the raw material prices for the cameras, I'm taking the same growth for accessories as well. Because I'm not able to find out any visible trend from the last 2 years. So I'm forced to do it. And in case I did not have this number also out here, I could have probably used the expected inflation. That the country's inflation is roughly about 7.5%. So I think my growth would also be 7.5% approximately going forward. So that could have been another basis for me to work out the growth number. Right? So this is how you can manage the abnormal items from the historical trend and then take a decision what makes sense. Right? And then you can copy and paste for these values. You could just copy and paste the formula that we discussed before. You could copy and paste and it will give out the expected raw material cost for both the segments. I'll take a pause here for any questions that you may have till this stage. Yeah, Prachi, I can understand the raw material price increase in the accessories is typically hard to explain. The thing is that when you work on a real life model, you would definitely have some additional inputs to justify your number. As I said, you would be doing some research about the market. You would have further details as to what accessories basically include, and then you will be able to come up with a better logic as to what percentage I should be taking over. So right now, have a choice to basically go back and do some investigation. But yes, practically, you might have some additional details about it and you will be able to justify that number. Great. Let's move ahead. Now, what about the research and development, sales and marketing, and the GNA? Okay, there are a couple of more questions. Let me read that. So, Amanpreet, you had this question, how many scenarios we need to develop through simulation? So, there's no limit to it. I mean, you could have typically, it's just for everybody's benefit. What may happen is that in a financial model for each and every number, if five people are sitting in a room, then all those five people would have a different input to take. Like just for accessory segment, somebody might say take 8.5%, somebody else could say that take the inflation rate of 7% because that's the prevalent inflation. Somebody else could say that in the past we've seen that it was pretty high. So using the logic, if it is 8.4%, it should be slightly more. It should be 10 to 12%, something like that. Somebody else could say that it cannot be flat. You take a higher number and then you gradually reduce it. So there could be multiple scenarios. There is no perfect answer for it. Whenever we forecast like this, we take certain assumptions on the basis of the best estimate that we can take as of today. Obviously, there could be other scenarios as well, but you would find out a couple of those scenarios and bring out a number over here, right? That's how we could work it out. So we need the best assumption as per our understanding. Could be something else for somebody else as well. All right, let's come back here. Now let's proceed to the research and development part. So usually what happens is that you could see that this has been the historical research and development, historical sales and marketing and all. So let's read a couple of additional statements from the management discussion and analysis. It says that CMC has invested heavily in the research and development in the initial years, and they would like to gradually decrease the contribution to the same. So the contribution percentage is going to gradually go down in the subsequent years to come. So what we are going to do, we will see that what has been the historical data. Let's first have a look at it. It's roughly about 8%. I'm going to reduce it to, let's say, 7, 6.5, or 5. Or what you could do, it was 9.9%. So let me say that it will be 9%, 8%, 7%, and 6 and 5. You could gradually reduce it like this, right? So the point is, it is just a statement given by the company stating that I've already spent huge amount on the R&D. Now I don't want to spend that kind of an amount going forward. So I'm going to gradually reduce my percentage contribution going forward. So if it was, let's say, 9.9 or roughly about 10% in the last year, let's say it's going to gradually go down to 5%, 5 to 6% like this. So I've taken a gradual reduction in this percentage out here. But if you notice, the sales and marketing has been in the range of about 21.5% average in past. So what we could do over here, that might go up because you see the competition is entering. And because of that competition entry, I might witness the increase in the sales and marketing cost because I would have to pay more to my sales guys and spend more on the marketing stuff. So you see that management discussion analysis also says this point that there is one part where CMC is going to increase back the contribution to the historical numbers, that is sales and marketing, because of increased competition. So what we are going to do, if you see, it used to be 24% earlier, which we have now reduced to 17%. So I'm going to gradually increase it by about 1 percentage point each year. So you could say that it will go up by 1 percentage point every year so that it increases to 18, 19, 20, 21, 22% like this. So this is a deliberate decision that we have taken because we want to spend more on marketing. We want to spend more on sales to be able to retain the best talent of the sales guys that we have got. Number one, we will give them more commission, so that will increase my cost. Number two, we'll have to increase our visibility by having more and more advertisements and doing extensive marketing to sustain the competition that is there in the industry, right? And last number over here is the G&A, which is usually going to remain a little consistent. So if your revenue goes up, then obviously your G&A expenses to be able to manage that would also go up to a certain extent. So we've seen that in the past it was roughly about 3.3% average. So let me take that average and keep it consistent going forward as well. I've taken which gives me about 3.3% average G&A as a percentage of sales, and I'm assuming it to remain constant at 3.3% going further as well. Now, G&A, Abhijit, is not a fixed cost. So when you say fixed cost, it's basically the office cost. Office cost also tends to go up. Your office, you have office staff, so you would be paying increment to them. You have some other office expenses like you've got tea, coffee, etc. Other expenses like courier expenses, some small petty expenses are there. All of that would be categorized in G&A. That definitely goes up. So what I've done, I've taken a flat percentage of revenue. So whatever revenue increase I see, I would obviously increase it a little bit. Now, there may not be a direct correlation because if your revenue goes up drastically, you wouldn't have the same increase being applied to your G&A because that is more or less, a component of that is more or less typically fixed. So if we are able to, split this number into two parts and figure out what proportion is the fixed number and what proportion is variable, which moves in tandem with sales, we could split that logic. Or what we could do, we could say that for 10% increase in revenue, I think the G&A will increase only by 7%. So there could be a 70% correlation here. So we could apply a factor that it will remain this, but then there would be some other factor which would be applied to be able to match that number. Because if your sales go up beyond a certain level, then probably there would be a need to have an extra office. right? If your scale increases drastically, then there would be a scale up in terms of G&A expenses as well. So what happens is that in the real life, when you have further details about the G&A, you might want to split it between the what is my facility rental, what's my repair and maintenance, what's my regular expenses related to the office staff, what's the IT cost that I'm spending in terms of internet, in terms of bandwidth and all that stuff. So there are a lot of office related expenses. So if you figure out that that is not directly correlated to the revenue, then you could also assume that the same number will grow up at roughly about 7-8%, which is in line with the inflation. Because yes, you rightly said it that if in case revenue increases by 50%, but your facility cost, the rental would not increase by 50% in 1 year. Because if you have the same set of buildings, then it won't increase the rental by 50%. But it may happen that beyond a certain stage of sale, your scale changes, and that means you need to take an additional facility to house more people in the company. Then effectively in that case, it would go up, but still not by 50%. So you may want to come up to a conclusion that historically I've seen that it is not directly connected to sales. If this percentage changes drastically, you may ignore it and simply apply a year-in-year growth on the G&A using certain laws. So that's another way of modeling this particular part. Great. Now, what are we left with? We have to figure out the research and development, sales and marketing, and G&A. Obviously, I can't compute it right now because what it is going to be, it is going to be 9% of sales. So if it is an absolute USD, it is going to be 9% of sales of 2019 sale. I'll go back and click on this 2019. There is nothing here. So because I haven't populated the P&L right now, but at least I can put the formula. In the P&L, I'll have USD million. Let me multiply that with power. Because here I might want to show the data in absolute USD. So I am taking that P&L number. Let me put that in bracket for better understanding. So this portion I'm picking from P&L, which covers the revenue in million. And then I'm going to multiply that with 9% assumption, which is there in this sheet. So once my P&L would be created, then I would be able to copy and paste this formula to other places. Right now it is showing 0 because there is nothing in the P&L. But in the next file, we're going to work upon revenue. So once that is worked out, it will automatically flow over here as well. But the logic that I discussed in the previous sheet would continue to be applied here as well. That you take the $sign in front of row number 7, because from H7 in the P&L sheet, we're going to bring the revenue in million, and that needs to be copied and pasted across the row number 37 and for 39 as well, and it needs to be shown in the absolute USD. So for converting million to absolute USD, I'm taking 10 raised to the power 6, and every time for referring to the same sales number in row number 7, I'm going to fix the row number 7 over there. So it becomes a formula which we would kind of copy and paste everywhere, which obviously is blank at the moment for the reasons that I just mentioned. But as and when we have the P&L ready, it will automatically be populated. And somebody is asking this question that do we apply this 9% growth on 87 million? No, it's not. It is not a year-on-year growth. It is a percentage of sales. So when I say 9%, it is 9% of sale. Whatever is your sale value, 9% of that is going to be sitting in the research and development. That's how it is going to be projected. Right? So that completes the next part for us. We have listed out the inputs and assumptions. Now we need to use all of these inputs and assumptions to be able to create the P&L. Now in the P&L, I can compute revenue because I've got the sales price, sales volume. I can compute raw material cost because I've got the volume and I've also got the raw material cost per item. I can compute research and development, sales and marketing, G&A, and eventually the EBITDA number as well. So till the EBITDA line, I have all the inputs available with me. So let's open the next file and work on the P&L till EBITDA line. Right? So take a minute to finish it off and then please open version number 4. Wherein we are going to talk about the P&L and a portion of the balance sheet as well.